Halo Survival, a fan-made audio drama produced by Podcast Evolved. Episode 3, Arrival. In a dark void segmented by various bright lights of stars and other celestial bodies, Installation 07, also known as Zeta Halo, hung deathly still in space. There were no space vessels around the ring, no sign of UNSC activity. Indeed, from space, it appeared as if the Halo ring was entirely dormant. The only forces on the ring seemingly hidden in plain sight from any potential hostile entities. As the Oni Prowler UNSC Swift Gist emerged from a slipspace portal and began to gain ground on the installation, Captain Cooper walked onto the bridge of the vessel, where two UNSC technicians were working hard behind their consoles to guide the Prowler closer to the ring.
Okay, open encrypted channel 7. Broadcast to all UNSC designated assets on the ring. Let's find out where we're needed.
One of the technicians turned to look at the captain.
Blackout protocol's in effect, sir. We won't be able to raise any UNSC forces from the orbit, and attempting to do so may bring us more attention.
Do we have an approximate location of the facility so we can sweep in and deliver our cargo?
The second technician flicked a few buttons and brought up a holographic, topographical view of the surface of Zeta Halo. The topography of the ring was fascinating, with every kind of microclimate decorating the surface of the planet. Eventually, the technician zoomed into a valley thick with trees and shrubbery. In the middle of the valley, in a clearing, a large UNSC facility was visible.
The compound is tucked away in the valley. We won't be able to land there. But we have found a safer landing spot hidden in the mountainside.
The holographic view changed to show a rocky plateau in the mountains. It connected onto some dirt tracks which would eventually lead the Marines to an outpost if they took the warthogs, which were stowed in the bay. Cooper stroked his chin and nodded.
Okay, bring us down at the plateau and lock down the ship once we've left. We'll deliver the cargo using the warhogs. While we're setting up, I'll send the Marines with the warhogs back here to secure the LZ.
Affirmative. You might want to buckle in, sir.
In the cargo hold of the Prowler, the rest of the Marines were rapidly preparing the warthogs for deployment once they hit the ground. O'Neill and Wisner were working on one of the M46 Vulcan turrets, connecting up the ammunition belt of the turret to the canister which was mounted lower on the turret's frame. Vorstock was behind them, mounting red jerry cans on the back of the Warthog in case they found themselves in the field extensively and needed to top up on the Warthog's hydrogen levels. Across the hold, Holt was filling a few BR-55 magazines with 9.5 by 40mm rounds from a metal ammunition container which was mounted on a folding table in the hold. After she completed filling each of the magazines, she slotted them into pouches on her combat webbing, securing them in place ready for their deployment in the field.
Hey Sarge, are we expecting trouble? Or are all these weapons just so we can look pretty?
Holt placed the magazine she was filling on the table and turned around to face the rest of the Marines as they were talking.
You've all heard the stories about the Halo rings. Unpredictability kind of comes with the territory.
But the Master Chief was never deployed on Zeta Halo, right? This ring never got dragged into the war?
You're right, O'Neill. Installation 07 never got dragged into the war. But that doesn't mean that it isn't subject of interest for other factions at play in the galaxy right now. You can never be too careful.
Holt turned, walking over to Vorstock, who was still silent.
Nat, are you okay? I know you're usually the strong silent type, but you haven't said a word since we got this mission.
Natalie nodded and looked up at the sergeant.
I'm fine. Just didn't think I'd be setting foot on a Halo again. Let's get this done.
At that very moment, there was an announcement sound over the intercom of the Prowler.
T-minus 5 minutes till touchdown. Finish what you're doing and strap yourselves in. As soon as we land, we're taking the warhogs out to Alpha Site. I'll be joining you shortly.
From a small office overlooking the troop bay, Nate Talbot looked nervously at the warthogs and the weapons which the Marines were handling. He was confident he'd delivered the mission briefing perfectly, but he wasn't so sure that this false shield of courage he had put up throughout the operation would withstand the coming journey. He wasn't sure how the Marines would feel if they learned that their field scientist had never actually been deployed in the field. Still, he would rather face their fury than the fury of an AI. In some ways, he was surprised Oni hadn't seen the uprising coming. The more they researched into Forerunners, the more they had uncovered about their relationship with AI, and how they eventually destroyed each other when pitted against one another. It was disturbing to see humanity falling down the same path, but there was nothing anyone could do now. He let out a deep sigh and then sat in a chair behind a white, clinical-looking desk, securing himself with a waist harness as the Prowler began its descent onto the ring. A few moments later, the Oni Prowler was gliding past snow-caked mountains and peaks as it approached the flat landing area which they had identified from orbit. The engines began to wind down, and then, with a dull thud, the vehicle touched down and began to settle atop the jagged rockwork. There was the mechanical hiss of pistons working, and then, slowly, the front ramp lowered itself onto the rocks below. Almost as soon as the ramp hit the floor, the two warthogs sped up from the hold and onto the rocks below, bouncing and throwing themselves from side to side as they headed down the side of the valley and began to wind down the mountains which shielded the landing zone from sight. Talbot sat fiddling with the signal dampener secured to the side of the second vehicle.
Doctor, is that thing going to be ready to go as soon as we arrive?
I believe so. If it needs any work, then the science team at the facility should have all the resources I need. Anyway, we'll be online in no time.
The convoy of two vehicles made its way through the thick forest. In the distance, the moans and groans of large animals could be heard, although the Marines weren't convinced they would know what these animals were. The vehicles drove for some time before eventually breaking into a clearing where they saw the UNSC facility in front of them. As they approached the facility, Cooper activated his comms and spoke to the Marines.
No sentries on guard? I'm having a word with the base commander. I know we're tight on resources, but this is a serious breach of security.
The warthogs ground to a halt just outside the gate for the compound, and the Marines disembarked, quickly unloading the signal emitter. Weisner and Holt picked it up and began to carry it into the center of the compound.
I'd kill for a forklift right now.
Cooper turned to the rest of the squad before they could walk into the compound.
O'Neill, Vostok, I need you to head back to the Prowler with the hogs. We could be a while, so it makes sense to have some security at the landing zone.
Oh man, I never get the fun jobs.
Cooper turned to Talbot.
Come on, Doc. Let's get this done.
As the warthogs began to drive away from the compound, the captain and the doctor walked in through the gates and quickly stopped. They could see Holt and Weisner, weapons drawn, the device on the ground next to them. Then, they began to take in their surroundings, and for the first time they realized that not all was as it seemed at the UNSC compound. The prefabricated buildings were strewn with debris, bullet holes and burn marks adorning their exterior shells and providing glimpses at the interiors. Flames licked hungrily at the rich air and caused small streamers of smoke to waft out of the little holes in the buildings. Storage crates were overturned, and here and there an assault rifle or battle rifle lay, rounds strewn around it, magazines empty. Cooper couldn't help but gasp as he looked around the compound.
Orders, Captain.
Holt said firmly. Cooper immediately activated his intercom.
O'Neill, Vostok, delay my order. Find somewhere to park up in the woods and keep your heads on a swivel. We're not alone out here.
He then turned to the sergeant.
You and Weisner need to secure the compound. I'll stay with the doctor while he sets up the device. We still have a mission to complete.
Holt nodded and motioned with a single finger forwards. Her and Weisner crept forward whilst the doctor moved into the clearing in the middle of the base and began to set up the device which was in his hands. He threaded cables and began to connect different aspects whilst Cooper crouched next to him with his DMR raised.
Work fast, Doc. We don't know what's out there.
Weisner and Holt continued to tiptoe through the compound with their weapons raised. Occasionally, they would find blood splatter and gore, which hinted that something even worse had occurred here. But there was nothing to indicate fatalities. It was strange. Judging by the amount of damage which the compound had endured, you would expect there to be casualties. But there was no sign of any UNSC forces which had inhabited the compound. They attempted to access the barracks building, but were met with a fire they couldn't get through, and had begun to creep towards the far side of the compound, where a field laboratory was established, when Holt motioned for them to pause.
Did you hear that?
They crept around the corner, and there they saw what they had dreaded. It was a sight Holt hadn't seen since the Human Covenant War. and she felt a knot in her stomach, and anger bubbling away from the surface as she remembered all the friends she had lost to them. A pair of Jorahane, known to the humans as brutes, were stood overseeing a group of Ongoi, who were known as grunts. They carried weaponry and were admonished in a variety of different colors, with one consistent feature. All of the aliens featured armor which displayed the bright red logo of the Banished, a dangerous and deadly mercenary faction which formed in the wake of the war. Oni had been monitoring their activities for some time, but to see them here, on Zeta Halo, meant trouble.
Sarge, we need to get back to the captain and get out of here, now.
She nodded, and the two quickly retreated, beginning to move back to the captain and the doctor. They sprinted around the corner and made it back to the two members of their crew. Before they could say anything, there was an ear-splitting bloom as a fuel rod round exploded to the side of their position, sending green plasma searing into a building and causing debris to spit across them. Suddenly, more Banished forces emerged from all around them, approaching them from all sides. Plasma rounds and spikes came at them from every angle, and the Free Marines and the Doctor desperately found cover wherever they could, as the advancing alien forces continued to pepper them with rounds. It was clear. They had to get out of here, now, or they would die on this ring.
You have been listening to Halo Survival, a fan-made audio drama produced by Podcast Evolved and narrated by Henry Paul Davitt. The voice of Captain Chris Cooper was performed by Cam 4K Studios.
The voice of Sergeant Maria Holt was performed by Kirsty for Halo. The voice of Private Matthew Weisner was performed by Matthew Keel.
The voice of Private Dan O'Neill was performed by Demetrius Hazel. The voice of Dr. Nate Talbot was performed by William Boyer. The voice of Private Natalie Vorstock was performed by Samantha Endrist. Guest starring Brad Jost and Tim Piper. Halo Survival was written by Thomas Fishenden and Colin Perkins. Audio drama created using assets from the Halo video games, and music from both the games and the Podcast Evolved original album. Thank you for listening, and evolve.